This year is an important one for elections all over the world, with the EU parliamentary ones coming up in just a few days. One issue that keeps coming up in discussions about the electoral process is the idea of electronic voting, ideally done online from one's own smart devices. The advantages would be clear: accessibility for people with any form of disability, ease of use, and almost instantaneous access to the results, no more waiting entire days for counts to finish. But the problems of implementing such a system of voting run quite deep, so any advantages they might offer would pale in comparison. First, we must note that the essence of democracy lies in the legitimacy and integrity of its electoral processes. It's quite a big deal. It's not something that we can take lightly, and any changes to this process need to be considered thoroughly. Trust in the slow, deliberate, even tactile voting process through paper ballots, despite its many inefficiencies, can uphold a form of sanctity of the democratic process, in a manner that no digital system can ever hope to replicate. In contrast, the impersonal nature of an online vote can potentially erode the social ritual of voting, and even impact civic engagement in a negative way. Sometimes it's actually good to stop for a second, take a breath, and consider our actions properly, rather than, just swiping around left and right for the next step. But you might ask, if we can do all of those other things online these days, from buying groceries to doing our banking, why not voting as well? The difference is that most of these actions with the online are actually very closely monitored and screened for fraud. Online shops verify each and every transaction, and banks actually go through great lengths to profile users and alert on any behavior that is out of the ordinary, such as, for example, using a credit card to purchase a PlayStation game from another continent at 4 o'clock at night. Voting is unique in that it requires two critical aspects at the same time: anonymity and trust or security. The conundrum of satisfying both anonymity and trust draws on the fundamental principles of information theory and cryptography. Anonymity requires that the identity of a user be hidden among a group of other users. This means that no one, including the system itself, should be able to link any action, such as casting a vote, back to an individual. On the other hand, security demands the ability to verify that a message, or in this case a vote, has been sent by a valid source and hasn't been tampered with. In essence, it requires some form of identification or traceability to ensure legitimacy. Herein lies the paradox. To ensure anonymity, you must hide identity, but to ensure security, you need to verify that same identity. Mathematically speaking, a system cannot maximize both of these parameters simultaneously. Increasing the degree of one inherently compromises the other. This is sometimes represented as a form of trade-off curve, for example, in cryptography. Therefore, the simultaneous satisfaction of complete anonymity and absolute trust or security is mathematically unattainable. It's a sort of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle for digital systems, if you want. Now, we can look at various new technologies that hope to solve this dilemma. For example, blockchains are often proposed. Blockchains are a great tool to distribute a database. That's why they actually are a distributed ledger shared among a large number of entities. But that doesn't protect privacy. Actually, blockchains are by design, by their very essence, public. In the case of voting, to maintain transparency and to provide a very viable voting chain, blockchain records will also need to be public. So this would basically nullify voter anonymity. Now, there is research going on about a specific type of blockchain based on something called ZKP, or Zero Knowledge Proof. This can, in theory, mitigate the very issues that we're discussing here. However, it adds yet another complex cryptographic layer on top of an already complex system, and this has never been thoroughly vetted for vulnerabilities by researchers. Developing such a system may actually be possible, at least in theory, and we may see something like that in a future implementation. But getting people to trust it, especially when it comes to large-scale elections that involve millions and millions of voters, and getting everyone to understand what's actually going on and not to be afraid of any sort of fraud in the voting process, is almost impossible, at least not with the current level of understanding of all the people involved. And we can't minimize the impact of complexity and being able to understand the system here. For one, courts will have to be able to understand it for the inevitable contestations and lawsuits. but also, very importantly, the individual users, the voters. They critically need to be able to trust the system. And how can you trust a system that for all intents and purposes looks like magic? On the other side, we have the physical ballot voting, which, again, is full of inefficiencies and imperfections, but it manages to navigate this paradox by separating the process into two distinct steps, each handled by a different entity. Namely, you can have voter registration and the act of voting. The first step is voter registration, which focuses on security and is done differently in every country. Individual eligibility is verified by showing identification, thus ensuring that the person is indeed a qualified voter and who they claim to be. This step establishes trust. The second step is the act of casting a vote. Now, this takes place in voting booths that ensure anonymity. Once you have verified your right to vote, you are allowed to cast your vote privately, and each and every ballot is indistinguishable from the other ones. This step ensures anonymity. So, while mathematically it may be impossible to maximize both attributes in a single function or protocol, physical voting can circumvent all this by spatially and temporally separating the processes, and they are carried out by separate entities under strict control protocols. And yes, it is not going to work perfectly each and every time. People have certainly tried to abuse the process throughout the centuries. But the main protection physical voting has is its very clunkiness. Hacking the paper ballot would require physical effort. People with guns, large groups of Confederates, each of them able to expose the whole affair if unhappy for whatever reason. Most importantly, it's expensive. It would cost a lot of money to steal enough votes to make a difference. On the surface, it may seem possible to digitize this process. However, the intricacies of each step pose significant challenges. First, we need to look at voter verification. In the digital space, verifying a voter's identity without violating their privacy is difficult. It would require a secure and foolproof digital authentication system that does not currently exist. Even if identity verification takes place offline, the risks of subsequent data misuse or manipulation remain. The second would be anonymity. Even if we overcame the identity verification hurdle, ensuring the anonymity of a vote in a traceable and auditable way in the digital system becomes problematic. Unlike physical ballots, digital votes aren't inherently indistinguishable and untraceable unless complex cryptographic techniques are employed, like we discussed, adding another layer of vulnerability. The third, and very importantly, would be trust. The digital divide, as it's called, and the question of literacy and accessibility means that many voters might not trust the process or understand how their votes are being processed, undermining voter confidence. If you don't think this is important, just look at the very recent and somewhat ongoing debate in the US about the legitimacy of the last presidential election. Fourth would be infrastructure and dependencies. A digital system would need to rely on a vast infrastructural network of servers, service providers, power grids, and end-user devices that could be targets for attacks intended to disrupt the voting process. And most importantly, a successful attack becomes hugely powerful due to the very efficiency of the system. A single button press could instantly turn millions of votes, leaving no trace. Each and every point along this digital chain can be a point of entry and attack, from the servers telling the results, to the communication lines, be they fiber optic, copper, or wireless, they can all be tapped, to in-between ISPs and content providers, all the way to the most vulnerable device of them all, the actual computer, be that a laptop or a smartphone, used by the voter to cast their vote. Malware is prevalent and already very hard to detect in many instances, but is mostly used for financial gain at the moment. Being able to influence the outcome of an election would open up a new and extremely enticing target for malware providers, which they would surely jump on. So, while theoretically it may look feasible to separate the steps digitally like in the physical process, the practical implementation presents significant and perhaps insurmountable challenges. Now, if we take a step back and think about this, is the problem we are solving really that important to warrant risking our entire democracy on? Sure, better accessibility for people with disabilities is absolutely a worthwhile goal, but specific improvements to the physical voting process can be made to accommodate their needs, such as mobile ballot boxes, for example. The other benefits of an online voting process, efficiency and speed, are just nice to haves, given that elections happen only once every few years anyway. we can all do with a bit of exercise to go out to the polling station and a bit of patience, waiting for the results. Embracing digital technologies has the potential to unlock a spectacular future for us, a sentiment I hold as an elder techno-optimist. But when it comes to the cardinal act of voting, we must, at least for now, lend our trust to the familiarity and tangibility of pen and paper. Now, don't forget to engage with us in the comments below, share this video, and subscribe for more insightful content. Until next time, keep pondering.